Good afternoon. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Thursday, February 6th, 2025 at 1 p.m. And we are going to continue with the FY26 budget language. We have Bernie Merrill here with us and Adam Gresham on live, I'm reading the live on the screen, live on our screen on Zoom. Before we start in on that, I just wanted to let the committee know that I had asked the treasurer if he would send me a memo to kind of further explain like that whole $20 million and how it came to be and why it hasn't been used and what would happen if they didn't repay it and all that sort of stuff. So I just asked them to kind of walk through it. So we would have a written history and not just what we all remembered when the treasurer was there. So, and I told them that we would be posting it on our website. And so I got that this morning and and Erin has posted it on the website. So you all will take a look at that. But that way we all have the same information and not relying on our memories of what we think somebody said. And we know how good that all is, right? Aged people.
Don't look at me.
Anybody over 65. Anyway.
Okay, boomer.
So now I will send it off to Hardy and Adam, and we last stopped somewhere. Oh, I think it was on page 17 with fund transfer.
That's correct. I marked where we left off in section E101.
Yes.
What page?
Well, they aren't numbered. The one that we got at 17, I'm hand numbering them from Grady. The yellow highlighted ones weren't numbered. But section D101 fund transfers A2, which is starting with from the transportation fund.
Yes.
That we all have? Okay.
I'm happy to pick up there. For the record, Hardy Merrill, Deputy Commissioner, Department of Finance and Management. So we had already run through the transfers from the general fund to other funds. We're now picking up on A sub 2, which describes two transfers from the transportation to other funds. These are both annual transfers. The first sub A is to the general obligation bonds debt service fund. These are debt service, costs related to transportation. And this is a transfer that takes place in an appropriate amount every year, $305,000 approximately. And the second transfer is to the Downtown Transportation and Related Capital Improvements Fund. This transfer has been taking place on an annual basis in exactly this amount for a number of years now. So this is another fairly standard annual transfer for that purpose, which is a municipal granting program. Ready to move on from the T fund?
Mm-hmm.
So the education fund has one transfer out to the tax computer system modernization fund, and this corresponds to A sub 1C. There's an annual transfer under the current construct codified in 32 VSA 3209B to fund the tax computer system modernization fund. There are two sources, and there is a larger piece transferred from the general fund and a smaller piece from the education fund. And those are the two funds in the current construct that are funding the tax computer system modernization fund according to formula in statute. And that's what we're looking at here. No other funds are contributing. It's only those two funds.
Well, and it makes sense because we have the income sensitivity. We also have the various things that the tax department is related to the education fund. So it makes sense to have that. One of those.
Yeah, there's
the other is the general fund. So
yeah,
that's everybody else.
And I will move on to sub 4, which describes transfers from the Clean Water Fund. One of those, the first is to the Agricultural Water Quality Special Fund, the amount of $11 million. And the second is to the Lake and Crisis Response Program Special Fund of $120,000. So these both align with the amounts recommended by the Clean Water Board in their FY26 budget. So the governor's recommended budget language is simply mirroring those recommendations of the board.
Hardy, when we started the Lake in Crisis, and at the moment, I think we still only have the one Lake in Crisis, Lake Carmine. That's correct. We started with a $50,000 appropriation, and it was that for a few years. Is this the first year it's gone up, or did we do that last year? I can't remember.
I think we did it.
You think we did it last year?
I think
Okay.
we did.
I don't have a recollection. We could follow up if.
That's all right. If Robert thinks we did it last year, then we probably did it last year. Thanks.
And they do, again, simply mirror the recommendations of the board. So I'm now on page 18, and at the top of page 18, the sub 5, we have two transfers that are from the other infrastructure essential investments and reserves sub-account in the cash fund for capital and essential investments fund. And in terms of shorthand, I like to think of the cash fund as actually being two funds, and one is for capital purposes, and it's a source of funds for capital bill expenditures. And the other is for other. So there's the other and the capital. So what's happening here is with the first transfer, 12.5 million is being moved from the other sub-account to the transportation fund. And the purpose of that is IIJA match. And so it was socked away in the other sub-account and to be saved for this purpose and this amount in FY26. So
This is the second one, right? Because we did 12.5 last year.
I believe so.
Yeah. Okay, I'm saying yes.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
I didn't remember the exact amount, but it is the second
We split it over 2 years.
consecutive transfer. So that's that move. And then the second one is transfer moving from the quote unquote other purposes sub-account $1 million to the capital sub-account. And that is based on a prior year balance that's basically being moved so that it can be used in the FY26 capital bill. So that adds to it takes essentially unallocated balance in the fund, and it's moving in the other fund, it's moving it to the capital fund sub-account for use in the capital bill. Is that clear as mud?
Yeah, totally. Did you have a question, or were you just waiting a second?
Okay. Okay. In sub 6, we've got transfer from the AHS central office earned federal receipts fund to the general fund. This $4.641 million number for this transfer is a number identical to that which I've seen the past several years occur in moving from this fund to the general fund.
What for? Or why aren't they keeping?
You know, Adam, you usually speak to the vagaries of the AHS earned federal receipts. Could I ask you to jump in on?
So the amount is this 6 sub A?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we asked them for an amount each year that they can, part with from the earned federal receipts, their blue book. And, this is the quantity. It's been this amount for a number of years. And, this is what they gave us this year. We, in years when we're hard pressed, we may quibble a bit, but we try to let them keep what they have so they can use it for other financial requests or requirements.
So maybe it
but
would
this
be
comes
helpful
from them.
if you explained what earned federal receipts are.
So these are federal dollars, matching dollars typically, that come in for various programs. Some programs use every penny. Other programs have leftover. So these are earned in the sense that there's state matching dollars that are put towards them. And they come in for various programs like Medicaid and various mental health and some through Department of Health. So they're all, federal programs that have federal matching dollars. And again, from time to time, some of those dollars wash out and they're held in this account. And they're used typically for human services catch up at the end of the state fiscal year for filling in accounts that need it. They're also used for emergencies and the like. But a small portion of them we sweep into the general fund to help us meet regular operating needs. And that's what you see here.
Yes, thank you. Can you tell us what the remaining balance is in the account?
I can. I'm going to give you a from memory amount, and then I'm going to check myself after I stop talking. But it's about 35 to 40 million.
35 to 40 million?
Approximately. That's correct.
Thank you.
I'm going to look now as I told you that, but yeah, I have a pretty precise number. And we keep track of that every year. So I would just mention that this is an account that, as Representative Iacovone is well aware from his time at AHS, this is an account that's used to help balance the books at AHS and occasionally used for other things.
Okay.
And so, Commissioner, would it be fair to say that, in our operating statement construct, the general fund has come to expect a certain amount in its revenue sources coming from this source each year. And I suspect that sort of the staling, the continuance of this same number has probably, it's somewhat logical in that there would be a hole in sort of your year over year revenue sources if you were to decrease that. But as the commissioner explained, there's quite a bit, there's certainly a fairly ample reservoir there, but we're not by any means shaking the tree, so to speak.
Right.
And to try, it's really just been, I think, this number has just been continued as an annual.
Maybe I just don't remember from
It's an annual amount.
One of those things that I haven't really.
It's been, it's been lurking somewhat innocuously in our transfers section.
Transfer sections, you have to pay attention.
This amount.
Okay, why don't we continue then?
Just to confirm the actual number, my memory was a little bit high. It was about 33.7 million through the end of fiscal 24.
Okay. Great.
Okay, and in sub 7, we've got a transfer from the AG fees and reimbursement court order special fund to the general fund in the amount of $2 million. That's the estimate that the Attorney General's office gave us to inform our budget, and we are running with what they told us to expect.
Tom?
Yeah, just another clarification, Hardy. I think I asked the question, or was asked the other day about, we read that the Attorney General's office, for instance, just settled something for $2.7 million. It received some funds. I think what the commissioner said was, well, we just have to put a number in. We don't know ever how much is going to come from the AG's office from settlements and whatnot. I'm just curious, is this in fact just a placeholder? And then at the end of the fiscal year, we're going to know how much it took in, and then it gets redispersed?
Now,
the 22 million,
right,
and we know
right.
that it's still in
And
progress.
so Adam, I was not available due to my injury to attend the treasurer's office budget meeting this year, although I had in prior years always attended. And this is one of the subjects that's discussed in that annual meeting. I do recall this is not simply, let's just throw 2 million. I recall this being other numbers in other years, and the treasurer, and I'm sorry, I referred to the treasurer's office. It's the attorney general's office that I meant to refer to. I recall in other years there being discussion around and higher numbers, and a $4 million number one year, and they cited specific reasons, that they expected. So I do think on the attorney general's office part, there is more to it than, I guess, a kind of an arbitrary placeholder. And we're asking for as reasonable an expectation, that as we can get, and we expect that that's what they're giving us in terms of a number that we can count on.
I'm just still trying to
Budget.
wrap my head around the notion that these funds come in. It's similar to the way I try to wrap my head around the DLL's enterprise fund. It's like, well, shouldn't any improvements come out of that fund? And the answer is, of course not. It gets swept into the general fund, and then the administration decides how to run the department. It's not a separate business entity. And so the AG's office, I guess, I'm not sure if it's a separate business entity. It's a law firm, but it's not a private law firm. So they don't get a chance to take the money that they've received and use that as base, whatever. I'm just trying to understand.
Okay, so I think you are making, and maybe this is what your comment was on, is yes, this amount could be higher. This amount will actually be whatever it actually is. And this is being written into law as something of a placeholder so that we see something, written in our bill. And this will tie to a number of 2 million that's on our operating statement that we prepare, where we show all the sources of revenue for the general fund and all the expenses. But this will, like other funds, like unclaimed property, for instance, or yes, the actual, this is an estimate of what there will be in FY26, but the actual transfer will be some different number with less precision. It won't be 6 even zeros, and it'll be, what it actually is. So yes, you're correct in that it is essentially a placeholder, and that the actual exact amount will vary. This is the number we're using for budget purposes.
And with the understanding that there may be a special fund that some of these things will go to, some of these settlements that they receive will go, that already are marked for particular funds. And that's just fine. This is just, it's not my area, but I just want to understand a little bit more about the ins and outs of how that works.
And this estimate from the AGO's office does not contemplate other settlements that flow to other funds, like opioid and tobacco funds, which are separate. This is only what would be expected by the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, in sub 8, we've got this transfer from the Cannabis Regulation Fund to the general fund, that when we met the first time with this committee to review primarily, the general fund overview. We discussed this at that time. It's a little, this is one that's a bit unwieldy. We will see this occur in FY26, and then we do not expect this construct to continue. But what we are doing here is, as we've done the past, at least 1 year, perhaps 2 years, we've had in a session law, which is Act 185, the 2023 big bill, there's an issue with the Cannabis Control Board that is basically in original establishing statute, the board is supposed to be funded by license and registration fees that go into the Cannabis Regulation Fund. And however, those fees do not cover the operating costs of the Cannabis Control Board. And so I think there were since the establishing statute, there were probably two trends that contributed to that. One being the license and registration fees being set intentionally to lower levels to provide greater accessibility. And they were not necessarily set to provide, maximum revenue or cover operating costs. So you've got downward pressure on the fees. And then you've also got the growing Cannabis Control Board and, expanding into things like adding functions such as enforcements and labs, and also repealing the sunset of the board, which was actually going to sunset after establishing the laws. And so it remains as a going operating concern. And the Cannabis Regulation Fund, the fees collected in that fund simply are not adequate to cover the operating costs.
Which we knew going in, and we knew that there's a structural problem. And we've done some temporary language over the course of a few years. And I remember talking to the chair of House Ways and Means about this a couple years ago. And we're going to need some new language at some point.
Yeah, there's going to need to be a new model.
Right. But the notion of 70% to the general fund and 30% to the substance misuse prevention fund for prevention programs, whatever, that's going to stay. But it's a question of how they access the money to take care of the cannabis control.
And yeah, to add a little more color to those comments, Madam Chair, the 70-30 split, that has always been contemplated for the excise tax. That's what happens with the excise tax. And so originally the excise tax was going to go 100% to the general fund. And then the original construct was that it all goes to the general fund, but then 30% will be appropriated specifically from the general fund. And it went to VDH the past couple of years for that purpose. We're doing two things in this section, in this language in the governor's recommended big bill. We're establishing a new special fund for the substance misuse called the Substance Misuse Special Fund. And that will utilize the same 30 split with excise tax revenue. And next year is the first year after a couple of years where the excise tax revenue will actually be going to the general fund. What it did for the past 2 years, the stopgap that the chair referred to was in the Act 185 E126 language. It was to take the excise tax and instead of having it go to the general fund, it all just poured into the Cannabis Regulation Fund, which was the registration and license fees, which were not enough to cover the operations of the board. So sort of the solution, which I might describe as a rather blunt instrument, was to take the whole great big pile and have it all pour into this fund. And then at the end of the year, after closeout of a fiscal year, then in the subsequent fiscal year, which makes it also a little complicated, the Commissioner of Finance and Management prior to July 31st has to determine, once we see the amount that's left in the Cannabis Regulation Fund, the one that was originally supposed to be just fees and registrations, but now the whole excise tax goes in, the Cannabis Control Board spends whatever it needs, whatever it has authority to, out of the Cannabis Regulation Fund. And then at the end of the year, we see what's left, and then we transfer that to the general fund. And then we had to also figure out, okay, of that transfer, then 30% needs to be dedicated to substance misuse. There was an unwieldy mechanism with kind of a lot going on there. What we are proposing to do for FY26 is we'll again follow this construct of wait till the end of the year And then in FY '26, we'll take whatever's left in it at the end of FY '25 and move it, except instead of moving it all to the general fund, it'll be 70 to the general fund and then 30% to this new fund, which will help greatly keep it segregated for that purpose, and only VDH will be accessing that. But what we're doing is the change here is, instead of transferring the entire balance left at the end of the year, which is what Act 185 originally proposed that we do, we're in the E section, modifying and repealing language. And what we're doing is only transferring the residual balance of the fund in excess of $4,035,000 following the close of fiscal year 25. And so the reason for that is we are leaving a little over 4 million in that cannabis regulation fund, because that will make up the gap for CCB in FY '26. So FY '26 will be covered after these machinations. We'll have what's left after leaving them enough to fund their operations through '26. We're going to transfer 70% to the general fund and 30% to this new substance misuse fund. So I guess the reason I described this in the beginning as kind of a one-year thing is this is how we'll deal with all this excess revenue from the excise tax going into the cannabis regulation fund at the end of this year. But then that's not going to keep happening. Starting in FY '26, the excise tax revenue goes to the general fund and substance misuse. These guys, we've left them enough funds to get through FY '26, but for FY '27, that's when the new solution will need to be, put in place. That could be something as simple as an annual transfer from the general fund in an amount to make up their operating gap, or it could be something, more complex, like some dedicated percentage of excise tax, which I'd rather not see, but, something else, something different will happen in '27.
Right. So that's good to have that reminder.
Okay. So, moving on, we've now got in sub B, transfers to the general fund. In sub B1, these are the what we typically refer to as the direct applications that we receive each fiscal year from the Department of Financial Regulation. So there's a statutory transfer from the Insurance Regulatory and Supervision Fund of which is projected to be a little over 46 million, and a similar transfer from the Securities Regulatory and Supervision Fund of almost 22 million, and a transfer from the Unclaimed Property Fund estimated to be about 6.5. And this is, I'll kind of tie back to Representative Stevens' question and comment earlier, which is that these are the actual amounts that will be transferred will be the actual amounts remaining in those accounts to be swept. And these are used as estimates for building our budget. That's why the language in sub B, which we actually, I'll spend a moment on, because we did tune up this language a bit compared to the way it's been written in the past to provide this clarity. So sub B states the following transfers shall be in accordance with the citations provided. Transfer estimates are for purposes of developing the fiscal year 2026 budget and do not supersede the actual fiscal year-end transfer amounts. We didn't have that language in the past, and I'm not sure we necessarily had all the statutory citations. So in effect, there was potentially a conflict where our, financial operations director would say, okay, how much am I transferring? This says to transfer $65,941, but statute says transfer the whole thing in the fund. So we're simply changing technically the language slightly to clarify that these are budget amounts, but the actual amounts may differ when the actual amounts left will be swept. Okay. We've also got in B sub 2, we're describing a transfer to the captive insurance regulatory and supervision fund from the general fund of a little over $1 million. And this may come as a bit of a surprise. This has actually been happening in behind the scenes for a few years now. We used to describe, and again, we're trying to be more technically accurate and clear with this change in language, but we used to describe all of the Department of Financial Regulation fund transfers kind of lumped together. And we would describe the three funds, and the language read something like, the unobligated amounts left at the end of the fiscal year shall be transferred to the general fund. And what has been happening is actually the captive program has not quite been covering its costs with the captive insurance regulatory and supervision fund revenue sources. So at the end of the year, by following the law, we would, if we transfer the unobligated balance from the captive fund to the general fund, we were transferring a negative number. And our accounting operation was like, yeah, this is what we got to do. So it was kind of misleading that we're actually doing effectively money going the other way, which we didn't expect. And we're now actually laying that out and showing what's happening.
So you're saying that aren't we like the number one captive insurance place in the world, or and we aren't making money?
No, that would not be a fair characterization, because there's a captive, there's a few different pieces, okay, moving. So just as by the same token, if you look at our cannabis control board that we just discussed at length, they would appear to be not making money.
Yeah.
But that's if you don't consider the excise tax, which is the bigger piece flowing to the general fund. There is similarly, and I can't cite for you the exact percentages and amounts, but the primary source of revenue from the captive program is flowing right directly into the general fund, and it's part of the economic's forecast.
Okay, so where would we see that on like either the monthly revenue actuals versus target? Is it on there?
You see it on the Schedule 2s.
Yes, you would see it on what we refer to as the monthly Schedule 2 revenue report, and you would also see it in a line with some descriptor pertaining to insurance revenue on the economist forecast, for instance, at e-board meeting.
So it's just thrown into the big general fund sandbox without having.
And I can't recall, I'm going to guess, that's something like, I think maybe over 60 million. Like it's not insignificant, but I actually don't want you to quote me on those numbers.
We don't break it out separately, is what you're saying.
So there's a tax on there's two different kind of revenue sources. There's a tax on the premiums, I believe is what it is, that flows right to the general fund. Then there are, for instance, registration fees. If you want to set up a captive in Vermont, that's different than a premium tax, right?
Right.
That's a registration fee, just like if you want to set up a dispensary, you pay a registration fee. But those fees were originally intended to cover the operating expenses of the captive program. But in recent years, those fees have not been covering the operating expenses. That's why we've had this negative balance in the fund that was then transferred to the general fund. And then, so we're just kind of bringing to light this.
I actually think I do.
Yeah, I think I understand it too. Okay.
I can provide some color just looking at the Schedule 2s through the end of 24. It looks like insurance premiums were $75.6 million. So, of which 29.3 were from captive. So that premium would go right to the state's bottom line. They wouldn't get any additional from their DFR special fund because they're actually using about $1 million of that. But you know, they bring about 29 million to the bottom line.
Okay, that's.
I would point out though, Madam Chair, if you look, you know, what, you know, Artie mentioned earlier, the Insurance and Regulatory Supervision Fund, you know, if you just look up at sub A and then sub B, we don't talk a lot about the insurance business, but that is what brings in the money. I mean, we spend an awful lot of time on captives, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but what puts money on the bottom line is what I call boring old insurance.
Bread and butter.
And thank you for providing a number, Commissioner Gresham, of 29. So that, what that tells you is the regular old boring insurance brings in about 50% more revenue than that special captive tax going directly to the general fund. But that's 29 is the number on that. And when I was thinking in the 60, 70 million range, that's obviously
That was the total.
the total insurance tax.
This budget portfolio that we usually had just a lump sum number that said that we would, you know, and it was around the 66 million or so.
And-
That was a few years ago.
And so actually, yeah, to really see for the boring old insurance, the total revenue would be this, I think it would be the 46 plus about 35 on the schedule too.
Yeah.
So it's really about 80, that's like an $80 million.
It's actually
We
42
all
on this
appreciate
schedule.
DFR. There's no question about it. So, okay, let's move on.
Okay. In sub C, we've got we're enumerating the two transfers from enterprise funds to the general fund in sub C. And we're again repeating similar language that clarifies these are estimated transfers for the purpose of developing the fiscal year 2026 budget. And the transfers shall not exceed the actual fiscal year end profits earned by the enterprise, net of any amount necessary to absolve the fund of a deficit. So we're intentionally making the effort here to not repeat the liquor fund situation that we've seen, and I know you've talked about. We're estimating these amounts, but we're not going to take more than actually remains in the fund. We're not going to drive a deficit in the enterprise fund. And so the estimate for the transfer from the sports wagering enterprise fund to the general fund is the 7.6 million figure. And in sub 2, the transfer from the liquor control fund is this $14.849 million figure. So again, you'll recall in BAA, we had adjusted the liquor fund transfer downward quite a bit, and it was something like an $11 million number. And we said, you'll see in FY26, we expect them to be starting fresh with no deficit, and the transfer should represent what is actually left, after their operating expenses. And we're using language to make sure we don't intentionally run a deficit. So that gives you the number for what we can expect from liquor. I just want to add again to make sure there's no confusion, like we just talked about with the captive and the cannabis, segment. There is liquor tax that flows directly to the general fund. So there's a lot more than just this sum coming from liquor and lottery to the state of Vermont to support its operations. This is just the additional amount in the fund to be swept, just so we all understand that.
Great.
Okay. So that concludes the D101 transfers section. Moving on to page 20, we've got a D102 reversion section. This includes reversions that were requested, that we were requested by the legislature to include these in the FY26 budget. So it's a little, just to explain, I guess, the budget, the budgetary mechanics of what's happening. An alternative, and when we present our executive budgets, what we do to come to balance is we try to make appropriation, we reduce appropriations to match available revenue. And what's being done essentially is, rather than adjusting, the alternative would have been to simply take these appropriations and some of them are one-time appropriations. They're really proposing to take these reversions in 26. to help kind of balance the
And they're all pretty.
legislative branch and the legislative branch is the legislative branch and can do as it pleases in terms of enacting budgetary law. So we simply mirror whatever's requested by the legislature.
And these are all, I see, because I use the fourth to the last and third to the last numbers. So the first one has a 22, so that was from 2022. And then tax collector commission was in 2018 and then 2019, et cetera. There's one from 2013, I noticed, for $39.10. So we're just doing a little cleaning up. Great. And 99 cents. In the future, are you going to be able, I guess we still have to.
So that's a great question, Madam Chair. The commissioner has the ability to sweep at the end of a fiscal year amounts under $100.
Right.
However, we would never be so bold as to sweep money from another branch.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know.
Even at 99
Perhaps.
cents. Oh, we want to see what we're doing. Never know that. Spend a couple bucks to get your.
Now, a request could certainly be made, either Adam or I are on duty. We're not both absent at the same time in the summer and a friendly phone call if you'd like to request any sweeps and we're happy.
All right. I'm sure you would be more than happy. Thank you for the offer.
Okay. So we've got really the final meaty section of section B is B103, the reserve section. So starting at the top, A sub 1 is describes the adjustment to the general fund budget stabilization reserve. And what is happening is rather than making a contribution, adding to the budget stabilization reserve, it's actually being unreserved and flowing out and becoming available to the general fund because the statutory cap of 4% of prior year appropriations. Did I get that figure correct, Adam? I believe
I
that's.
think so. Yeah.
I believe that's the formula. So
Yeah.
if we have been making in recent years the statutory maximum contribution to the stabilization reserve, which we have, if we had higher, total amounts appropriated and we're feeding in that 4% maximum amount, but then you have a year, if last year the total appropriations were a bit lower than the previous, we would be in a position where we're exceeding the statutory cap. So we have to actually, per law, unreserved money, and then that is now available to be expended within the general fund.
Mm-hmm.
There is similarly a statutory adjustment that is resulting in $2.7 million being unreserved from the Human Services Caseload Reserve. And when we ran through this in our last presentation, I told you this is a really complicated to get. I could provide a spreadsheet as follow-up for anyone that would like to see the detail and try to follow this mechanism, but I can assure that it's all being performed according to statutory requirement and formula.
We have a question.
Yeah, I haven't even looked at the statute, so I really wasn't aware of that requirement. I guess I'm just asking, does this concern you at all, given what is happening in Washington? I mean, I'm assuming that, well, I guess I'm concerned about needing to draw on the caseload reserves in the event that certain federal funds are not available to us anymore that cover various programs and services. But I think what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that this amount has to come out.
Yeah, well, we would have to propose notwithstanding statute
Okay.
if we did not want this to occur, and
Mhm.
we're kind of, our default is to follow statute, and, but that's, Representative Bloomley, that's an option the legislature could consider. But we're just performing this and generating this number based on what our accounting director says is required to do. by statute. So, and it actually, I think, I didn't really, again, it's quite complicated. I think it actually goes to satisfy the obligation for the 53rd week of Medicaid.
Right.
But that would mean then that that's less from the regular general fund to satisfy that, and it's coming from there. And so there's a bunch going on there, and it's all per statute what we're describing here. I don't think I'm not, I think you asked me the question, am I concerned about potential federal stuff and need to draw on the caseload reserve? And I'm personally not prepared to comment. I really don't know. You know, I don't know whether there's, you know, material cause for concern there or not. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, the next A sub 1C describes the additional reserve to be made in the 2753 reserve. This amount is consistent with the amount we presented in the fall in the 2753 reserve report that we owe to the Joint Fiscal Committee. So this is, there's a memo and a report associated with that, and that's simply mirrored here in the budget recommendation. So this is the unusual one.
It should look familiar because
The number should look familiar, and this ties to a number that's featured on our operating statement. So what we are, what is being proposed here is simply unreserving the amount that was reserved for future use in the BAA. So that's essentially.
and we'll true up that number based.
And this number's changed because, yeah, this is contemplating both the governor's recommended budget adjustment act and also items in the C section of this.
It's actually very close. It's off by $2 million. It's 133.4 or something that we have. So it's very, so it'll just, once the budget adjustment passes, we'll have whatever that number is. So
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And a sub 1E. Okay, yes, this is the notwithstanding language for 32 VSA 308C. And what that is saying is, rather than follow, if there's any surplus, you know, revenue that's available to the at the end of the fiscal year of 26, rather than have it follow the statutory formula and go half, I think, to the rainy day reserve and half to I'm sorry, Commissioner Gresham, I'm blanking.
It'd be half to the pensions,
Pension.
I knew it was
teachers
pensions,
and-
but
yeah.
I couldn't remember exactly the precise and whether it was OPEB and so forth. Anyway, this is notwithstanding that statutory formula to say any surplus available, we are reserving that for funding the transformation of Vermont's education system in fiscal year 27. And
So whereas D was based on the FY25 budget, E is based on the FY26 budget. So.
yes, if it's saying if there's, rather than follow the statutory formula, we've got these urgent needs in terms of education transformation, and
It's a bit more specific than the FY25.
Yeah.
So, okay, good to know.
okay.
Question from Rep. Harrison.
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but let's say for whatever reason, the Education Transformation Initiative, and I don't want to get Debbie Downer, doesn't get approved. What happens to the money that we're trying to set aside for helping with that transition in terms of property taxes? Does anything change?
Or is it looked at as now a surplus? And therefore we have to pay a certain percentage to the pension funds?
So are you talking, Representative Harrison, are you referring specifically to any funds that might result from this D 103 sub E reserve language?
I think so, but it may not be. I'm looking at the 77 million.
Yes.
So that's, again, I may be asking the question in the wrong spot. I'm just asking what happens, because this talks about the education transformation, but what if that doesn't happen?
This is much more restrictive than D was, which says, and any other uses.
Okay.
And this one doesn't say in any other uses. It's only for education at this point,
Yeah.
the way you're proposing it.
Yeah.
That's correct.
I guess the way I'd probably respond, Representative Harrison, is any surplus at the end of FY 26 contemplated by this language is not yet a twinkle in a father's eye. And during the session next year, when there are updated revenue forecasts, it would become then a real question, I suppose, of whether funds are available and to what purpose they might be dedicated. But this is the governor, though, with the governor's budget recommendation is simply really, I think, making the statement that, rather than have the standard statutory formula where any surplus would go to a rainy day reserve and to the pension purpose, we want to notwithstand and dedicate it to a certain purpose. That's usually, in recent years, there has been similar notwithstanding language inserted by the legislature, for instance, to divert surplus when it looked like it was coming in to other various purposes prescribed by the legislature. So that I guess, this vehicle of notwithstanding 308C is certainly not unusual and very conventional. And I think what is happening here is the governor is stating what the governor thinks the priority should be, as this is a process that is anticipated by the administration to span multiple fiscal years. With regard to the 77 million, I don't think there's any connection. The 77 million refers to cash that's in the bank right now that is being recommended to deploy to buy down the property taxes next year as a 1 year. And that pertains only to that year. And that pertains really to buying down, the cost of our existing educational system more than it does apply to transforming to some different model, I guess is how I understand this.
Thank you. Sure.
Okay, in A sub 2, we are unreserving from the quote unquote other cash fund or cash fund other sub account, $12.5 million for transfer to the transportation fund for use by the Agency of Transportation.
Is this the same 12.5 million?
This is
It's a new 12.5 million?
I am looking. No, so yes, it's the same 12.5 million. So it was transferred in the preceding section. First, it had to be unreserved. So the language reserved it within the cash fund, other sub account. So there's two mechanisms that have to take place, but it's kind of confusing since D103, as we read the bill language, that comes after D101, but the unreserving has to happen first and then it can be transferred. So yes, it's the same amount and it's related to the IIJA match. And then at the top of page 22, we've got a $14.5 million amount being unreserved for use by the Department of Environmental Conservation. So this is a similar IIJA match unreserving However, there's not a corresponding appropriation or transfer in this bill because the appropriation is actually made, I believe, in the capital bill for this one.
Oh, okay. Because it's related to clean water? Or don't we know?
I don't know that actually.
Okay. We'll find
That's a
out.
good question though. Yeah.
I do know, I mean, I know that the IIJ match funds going to DEC, they were primarily adding additional funding to some existing, the street streams of federal revenue and the drinking water loan revolving fund,
Right.
being one of those.
Water treatment.
And a number of those listed. In terms of the reason why they were chosen to ride in the Capitol bill, I don't have that full story, but. Okay, and in sub 3, we've got some standard annual language that clarifies how the fiscal year 2026 Transportation Fund Stabilization Reserve should be calculated. And that's recurring annual language. So
Right. Now
So that's gotten us through the D section.
Yeah.
And I had planned to take a pause and turn back over to the commissioner
Great.
for
Okay.
section E.
Have you feel
All
about
right.
Commissioner?
So normally, kind of in the E100s, you can normally shift up a gear and kind of cruise a bit. There's a fair amount of standard language to go through, but the administration wanted to keep you guys for your viewing pleasure. We wanted to put in a few things of note. So we did, and we actually started by removing a section. Normally, as you know, those who've been looking through these budgets before, as you know, the E100 section is the section where we create positions.
Right.
And this year there is no E100 section. However, as we've spoken about earlier, there are some positions that are contemplated and requested in this budget, and we are dutifully funding those positions. But the creation of the positions we are skipping, and that is because we will be shifting positions within the administration from what we call our position pool to fill those positions. Taking long-term vacant positions and sweeping them into the position pool, and then reclassifying those positions into the positions that we are requesting. So for that reason, there is no E100 section of position creation, but there is an E100.1, which I believe, Madam Chair, this should be familiar to the committee. I think you may have airlifted this into the BAA with the exception of sub 4.
Right. Number 2, we put in the BAA. That was to give an additional allowable uses for the FEMA to support municipalities.
Right. And I think so maybe that component of E100.1 can be removed, but sub 4, what sub 4 does is it expands the usage or the allowable use for the original Act 87 appropriation to be used not just for FEMA share, state share for FEMA match, but also for any federal match. So it's just the non-federal share is what the language says. So rather it being just for FEMA, it could be for any federal.
Right. And when we talked to Doug Farnham, we agreed that we needed to know a little bit more, and it wasn't as urgent as number 2 was.
Okay, and he would be the correct person to speak to.
Yeah.
Chief Recovery Officer.
So we'll have
So that is the E100.1. E100.2 is also a Chief Recovery Office initiative, and this should also be familiar from past budgets. And what we're doing here, basically, to be kind of plain, what we're trying to do is make sure that the original EROP grant that was, I think, all the way back in 2021 for 200 million federal dollars is completely leveraged, is totally used. So we, in our desire to make sure it is fully leveraged, what we're doing here is allowing for the swap of certain appropriations that may or may not go out the door prior to the federal deadline for the usage of these funds. We're allowing those funds to be replaced with general funds, and then we would apply those liberated, I love the terminology used, the liberated EROP funds to be redeployed to qualifying expenditures that we already know do qualify for are eligible for this federal.
So you're taking general fund and applying it to ERAP and then using the ARPA money for ARPA qualified projects.
Yeah, or EROP money for EROP qualified expenditures. Yes, that's the intent. And again, I think this is not the first, but maybe the second or third time we've done. So that's what this language does. And remembering that this grant 3034, again, I think that was from 5 years ago, maybe. It was a while. And most of that money has gone out the door, but we're kind of approaching kind of the witching hour. And so we want to make sure that every penny that we receive is put to use. Okay. So that's what that section will do. Pardon me, are there questions on that?
Not seeing any.
All right, moving on. E133 and E134 should be familiar. They are annual language, and this is to differentiate the appropriation that you see in B133 is actually divided between the kind of the administration of the VSERS operating budget in the Treasurer's Office, as well as the folks in VPIC who are investing the money, investing the pension plan. And so there is, in these two sections, a delineation of where that money precisely is going. I would note that these are not general fund; these are pension trust fund monies, but still, we like to track them. And these are in E133 for the VSERS retirement system. That's about a 7.5% increase over the prior year. And for E134, the VMERS system, municipal employees, that's about an 8.6% increase over the prior year. Okay. So the cost of administering the programs are going up. If there are no other questions in E139, this is part of a total of $3.4 million appropriation to tax and in B139, and this just delineates certain parts go to the AG as well as PV&R in tax.
Right. This is standard, and the tax department might talk to you about AG.
Right.
Okay.
And then again, normally the next few sections are a bit of a snoozer, the pilot payments, but this year we put a little bit of a curveball in there. In that in section E142, this is annual language, but the third line down, normally it says, and without regard to the appropriations for correctional facilities and the city of Montpelier, and there is no city of Montpelier in this new language. And that you can see in E142 and then E142.1. this is a change, and there's a bit of a story behind this. As the committee may remember, the pilot funds are paid to municipalities that host state property. It's payment in lieu of taxes. And these payments are made out of the pilot special fund, which is receives revenue from the state share of a local option tax. So when a town implements a local option tax, 70% of the proceeds go to the town and 30% go to the state. That 30% to the state goes into the pilot special fund. And that is used to make towns whole for state property. However, in past years, there's a form, and the payments made to the towns is according to a statutory formula in 32 BSA, chapter 123, sub 4. I think it's 32 BSA 3209, I believe is the actual citation. But this formula was often prorated depending on what assets were available in the pilot. So a community may not get 100% of its formulaic amount from the pilot plan. And that was true right up until a year or two ago. But as the pilot fund has collected more assets due entirely to the fact that more municipalities have instituted local options taxes and the revenues going into this fund have increased, the formula for pilot payments to towns has not been prorated. It's been 100%. So that's the first kind of data point. The second data point is that there were special payments made to both the city of Montpelier and municipalities that host correctional facilities. And those were substantially to compensate them for the proration of the pilot payments, because the city of Montpelier hosts a lot of state property. And municipalities that host correctional facilities, often that was a dominant share or a large component of their grand list. And so there were special appropriations made to the city of Montpelier in B143, $184,000 for many years.
Right.
144, which was a smaller amount, $40,000. It was, I think, divided up to the 5 different municipalities that host correctional facilities. Anyway, what we're saying here is now that the pilot payments are not being pro-rationed, that's the terminology. Now that there's not a rationing of the pilot payments, there shouldn't be excess payments made to the city of Montpelier and to municipalities that are hosting correctional facilities. I believe last year they still made the B143 payment to Montpelier, despite the fact that the pilot payments were 100% of the formula, because there were substantial flood damages that still needed to be recouped. So I think they still made the additional payment in B143. But this year we're saying that that would no longer be necessary. So you notice that in the language here, we're taking out City of Montpelier from E142, whereas if you look back in this year's budget, Act 113, you'll notice that that is in there. And then in E142.1, you'll notice that to the City of Montpelier is crossed out.
Right.
So we're just making the extra payments to correctional facilities. And we, I guess we kind of ran out of bandwidth before we submitted the budget, but we, began to question whether we need to make these payments to towns that host the correctional facilities anymore. That and the fact that it's such a small payment with $40,000 divided evenly between, I believe, 5 communities. We just wondered what the purpose was. But anyway, we decided that we wouldn't go there this year, but we would mention to the body that if there's of interest, we'd be during the
Okay,
interim.
so the tax department is coming in at 9 AM on Tuesday, I understand, so.
They would be able to speak to that.
Yes, exactly. And I think the current commissioner will still be here as
It
of
might
9.
be his swan song testimony, in fact.
I know, well, nice to have him here one more time.
You guys should take care of him and be nice to him because
We've
it's,
always
you
been
don't want him
nice
to
to
go
him.
away in a bad mood.
We've always been nice to the commissioner of tax.
So also in E142.1, there's the addition of and 4C, and that gets to actually what you see and what the deputy commissioner referred to in his testimony about the municipal buyout reimbursement program. That is created in E142 spot 2. And the chief recovery officer can speak more eloquently about this program, but in a nutshell, what it is using some pilot fund assets to create this buyout program to kind of ease the grand list burden that is placed on communities that are removing properties from the grand list by buying them out. And this program would it would pay 100% of the loss to the grand list in the first 5 years, and then it would step down and make it 50% for the next 5 years before it phases out. So that's, kind of in a bit of a nutshell what that does. And it's really a joint venture between the Agency of Administration, between the Department of Taxes, and between Public Safety. So they were all playing a role in that program. But like I said, I think the Chief Recovery Officer would be happy to speak to you in more detail if he hasn't already.
Okay.
In E144, you see what I refer to the correctional facilities, they still will get their pilot special fund payment in addition to what their statutory formulaic amount is.
Which isn't very much.
Are there questions on that?
I'm not seeing any yet. We may not know enough to ask questions yet, but tax will be coming in, so we'll know more then. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if that was enough time to give the deputy commissioner a break after that long slog through the D section, but I was going to turn it over for the E200s to him and then step back in at the E300s.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Picking up with section E200, Attorney General, this is standard annual language. I think looking at the clock and it's after 2:15. Shall I just kind of accelerate and run over the standard annual language type?
You just say standard annual language. Write that down.
Sure, okay. And section E208, Public Safety Administration, authorized to enter in a performance-based contract with Essex County Sheriffs. That's standard annual language. Again, in section E209, Public Safety State Police, these elements that, prescribe certain amounts for certain purposes for wilderness search and rescue and drug task force are standard annual language in sub A and sub B. There is a new sub C added in section E209. This was added at the request of the Department of Public Safety to ensure that 2.1 million of the general fund appropriation that is proposed in this governor's recommended budget is allocated for state police vehicles, which maintains the current operations using the general fund now instead of the use of transportation fund by the Department of Public Safety. Since we're proposing against, this ties back to the proposal to stop making appropriation of $20.25 million of T fund to the state police and replace it with general fund. And that is why this detail in sub C has been added to clarify that things will continue in terms of their funding of their vehicles the same way they do now, but it'll be general fund instead of T fund for that purpose. Section E212, public safety is the standard annual language pertaining to dry fire hydrants. Section E215, military administration, standard annual language again that describes the amount specifically to be dispersed to the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation for the National Guard Tuition Benefit Program. Section E219, military veterans affairs. This is standard annual language that is being, continued with recommending the similar amounts that we've seen in recent years for these purposes. Section E232, Secretary of State, the Vermont Access Network budget is a little bit different. So what we're doing here is specifying the purpose of the $1.3 million general fund appropriation that you'll now see appearing in B232. And we've never seen a general fund base appropriation in B232 until FY 2025, when it received a base appropriation of $1 million. And there was language in Act 113 establishing that the Secretary of State would request a proposed operating budget from the Vermont Access Network to maintain its current level of operation and programming, and include the proposed operating budget as part of its fiscal year 2026 budget presentation. So that's the explanation of the 1.3 million GF, and we've simply reported that verbatim from the Secretary of State's office in the recommended budget. Section E300, funding for the Office of the Healthcare Advocate. Are you taking back over, Adam, at E300?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, I will turn it back to you.
All righty. That was fast, Hardy. So E300 also is standard language that is in there to delineate the sums that are part of the total of about $27 million appropriation for the Secretary's office. A component of those are used for the healthcare advocate, legal aid, and the
Did those numbers go up by 3%?
They did not. They
You
are the
level
same
funded.
numbers as last year, and I think Human Services would be able to speak to you on that, but no, they are the same numbers as last year.
Thank you.
In E301, in kind of innocuous looking language that sets us back about $650 million or so, which really is the language that delineates that the state funds in that appropriation will be used to meet our state commitment to the federal government as part of our Section 115 waiver. Most of that money, as this committee is well aware, is state general fund, but some of that money is from other sources, which sub B lays out, delineates. So there is some IDT, interdepartmental transfer, not much, considering the amount of state general fund, but there is some that is from local schools as well as from designated agencies. The only thing I'd point out here is the $60 million number you see in the middle of the sub one. That amount was 50 million last year. So that's about a 20% increase in local education agency, or fancy name for local schools. It's about a 20% increase over the year, which is not insubstantial. Like I said, I think the folks in Human Services can speak more specifically about this language. Same is true in E301.1. And, this is language that's put in the budget every year. And really what this says is that the legislature is giving the business office within Human Services central office, the flexibility to close out without a great deal of hair pulling and
Right.
trouble. So it just gives him or her some flexibility to move money around to meet closeout.
Right, this is our mixing bowl, so we'll
Yeah.
see what that is near the end. Good place.
And within E 301.2, they're extending for another year the home and community-based funds available since the federal government evidently has extended the fund availability into March of 2026. So here they want to extend the availability to carry forward and to use those funds for another year, which is what that language does. And finally, did when the secretary spoke to you guys, did she speak at all about hospital directed payments?
Oh, what? I'm sorry.
Hospital directed payments? I don't
Yes.
think so.
Okay. Well, in E 301.3, here the agency is asking for authorization to seek a HDP, hospital directed payment program, approval from CMS, which is their federal agency of jurisdiction. This allows them to try to set up a hospital directed payment program under our Section 1115 waiver. It is something I believe they are eager to do.
And does this conflict in any way with the whole ahead model?
I don't think so. I think this, oh boy, this would be malpractice.
That's all right.
if I explained it anymore.
No is fine for right now. We'll
But
find
I do
out.
think this is also involved with dish payments, the disproportionate
Yes.
share payments, So I think the idea would be we would set higher reimbursement rates for hospitals that are involved in this program for, I believe, primary care, maybe other procedures also. But because we would be setting special reimbursement rates with those hospitals, we would be reducing their disproportionate share amounts and reallocating to other hospitals that are not part of the hospital directed payment program. That is a vast summary,
That would
but
be-
I think that's basically what the program is. But I think they would be very good to have in. I know that is a program that the Secretary's office has been eager to try to negotiate. In E 312, that too is, pardon me, relatively standard language in terms of Ryan White and VDH and what they do with AIDS, HIV monies that they receive. Hardy, I think it might be back to you.
Okay, I'll pick up in section E 312.1, and I see we're just a couple of minutes to 2:30. Is there a hard stop, Madam Chair?
No, we could be a little bit flexible, but not too close to 3.
Okay.
Let's keep going for a bit.
Okay, very good. So
Helmets picked out already?
in section E 312.1, there is a slight amendment to one-time appropriation language from 2023 Act 78. So the FY 24 big bill, and it made a global commitment appropriation to the Division of Substance Use Programs for a 2-year pilot to expand the Blueprint for Health Hub and Spoke program. And what we're doing here is simply striking the words 2-year, because we saw on our and you'll find this figure on our carry forward report that we provided, that we also spoke about. There was a balance of, I think, around $6 million. There was a remaining balance in the fund dedicated, in the appropriation rather, dedicated to this program. So we're striking the 2-year pilot language so that it can continue beyond 2 years. And we're adding the language that unexpended appropriations shall carry forward into subsequent fiscal years.
So in budget adjustment, this was extended one more year, and in this, you're just extending it until the money is done.
That's an accurate summary. Yep. Okay, in E312 .2, there is a modification to section E100 language, which is position language, and it's simply making a correction to the description, creating
Oh, yes.
the Health Equity Advisory Commission's position of a private secretary. That was created in the Agency of Administration, and the Agency of Administration was designated to provide administrative assistance to the commission, and that function and position are being established in the Department of Health instead. So it's simply a
Right.
retroactive correction of.
Well, and in fact, again, in the budget adjustment, we transferred the $500,000 out of the Agency of Administration into the Department of Health. So this is now the person who's following the money.
I think that's essentially accurate. Yeah. The only thing I would add is that there's sort of two discrete functions. There's the Office of Health Equity, and then there's also a Health Equity Advisory Commission. And this is actually moving a position associated with the Advisory Commission support function. And my understanding is that both functions, the operational office and the commission, are both moved to VDH. And so I just wanted to point that out. There's a slight, there are two technically different entities, which are the Advisory Commission and the Office of Health Equity. The next section, 312.3, makes changes to statute pertaining to the duties of the Health Equity Advisory Commission. And it's just aligning with removing obsolete language based on the permanent location of the Advisory Commission now in the Department of Health. So I think that's just technical cleanup. And on the next page as well, it's really just technical cleanup. It's not necessary to print in statute when the executive director of racial equity would call the first meeting of the advisory commission, because that's obviously occurred. And so just
That's good.
technical housekeeping. Moving to 312.4, this is where we're adding the statutory language to create the substance misuse prevention special fund that I spoke about in talking about the cannabis transfer to the general fund. So establishing the special fund in codified law is what we're doing here in terms of the numbers, which are 30% of the revenues raised by the excise tax and the not to exceed figure of 10 million. Those all comport with prior statutory language. We're just having it associated with a special fund, which will once again really reduce the administrative complexity associated with the dedication of funding for this purpose. So correspondingly, section 312.5 is repealing the prior statutory language associated with substance misuse prevention funding. But we're keeping all the same parameters in the new special fund construct. Section E324, expedited crisis fuel assistance. This is standard annual language to ensure that families can receive assistance on an expedited basis to ensure they don't run out of fuel.
Chair,
Yes.
just to be clear, is this money from the federal government, LIHEAP money? That's currently up in the air.
That's a good question. My understanding, by my recollection, it's the fuel tax that funds this assistance. There's a state fuel tax that you might be familiar with, and I believe
Heating assistance does come from the federal, right?
There is a lot of that. I don't remember where that shows up in here.
And perhaps what we raise via the fuel tax, I know what we raise via the fuel tax is used for this purpose. It may match for federal, and I'm not sure on that. I think the only, and I guess again, I don't want to speculate about federal funding streams that may or may not be in jeopardy. But when we went through that little bit of drama last week, where there was the first memo and then there was the clarifying memo. I mean, when the clarifying memo established that, it tried to make clear that no individual benefit programs, any programs that pay benefits to individuals were in jeopardy. So, but on the other hand, then the whole original thing was rescinded the next day again. So,
I think that shows up in the B section of this language, just to answer this question about that. So.
in terms of the
In
appropriation.
terms of where the appropriation, is, we don't always have language about it. Question,
Okay,
pay attention to that.
in E325, it's standard annual language again, and in this section, it's authorizing spending on the Housing Opportunity Grant Program.
These are the HOP grants?
I believe so.
Believe so. In the Office of Economic Opportunity.
Yeah, that's what
They
it is.
administer it.
Yeah,
Okay,
so it's specifying of the base appropriation in section B325, this amount, 23 million is carved out for this purpose. So
26.
section, that's the number cited. Yep.
Okay,
Section E326, standard annual language again, authorizing spending on the replacement and repair of home heating equipment. Same language, same amount. Section E338, corrections, correctional services, standard annual language again, providing DOC with specific funding from the pilot special fund to make payments to municipalities. And then section E345, this is really the of the section of this range of sections I've just covered. This is the one that's sort of something new and different. And what it's essentially doing is removing ACO bill back from this statute. It's One Care Vermont is ceasing operations. So it's adjusting, so it's making some formulaic adjustments accordingly and eliminating the accountable care
oh, so you're
organizations portion.
spreading the 8%
Right,
to the hospitals and nonprofit services
Right.
corporations, and you did that, did each of them get a similar percentage increase? I haven't calculated yet.
and I have not, I've not
Where did the
performed that.
numbers come from to make the new numbers?
This came from Green Mountain Care Board.
It did.
It came from, it
Yes.
came from the board. So,
Okay, thank you.
and basically, we produced it verbatim.
Okay. Thank you. Okay,
Okay, we're now up to E500. Commissioner, were you going to pick up here?
I am going to do that. And, I was looking through this while you were speaking and, honestly, there's a lot of kind of what I would call standard language. The first part, E500 just says, you should use global commitment funds for global commitment eligible things. The next section breaks out some special education costs as we do every year. The wording is the same, but the numbers have changed. They've gone up.
yeah,
But it's the exact same wording. These are ed fund
right.
monies. Same with, same language, state place students and adult ed and flexible pathways. The bigger, I think that, kind of the beef in this section would be beginning with section E508.
So
where we
507
are-
English language learners is also standard?
Well, it is now.
Okay.
It is now.
Yeah.
I think that was initiated last year.
Okay,
I don't think they were a line item actually in the budget. It was, remember, we had a double count in this year's BAA that we, because we put a line item in, but we never backed it out of the education payment. So we had actually double appropriated. So this year, it's going to be just in the E5071.
I'm going to give you 5 minutes and then we're going to stop. So maybe we can get to the end of the education section and then
Okay.
we'll do higher ed and the rest some other time.
Yeah, I mean, the next couple of pages, E508 is just,
See what you're doing.
we have removed the reference to universal meals in statute.
Yeah,
So, I mean, that, I'm sure you guys will have things to say on that, but in terms of, explaining what we've done, that's.
right. And we heard that in the governor's budget address, so we would
And
expect to
then
see it.
with E511, that too is kind of well, normally standard, although this year there's a little bit of a curveball, pardon me, in that they determine the amount of supplemental assistance awards. They're calculated based on a NEEP index. That's an inflationary index that they use. And in a bizarre twist, when they factored in the new NEEP indexes, a number of districts, but the way the formula works, would actually experience a decrease in their assistance grants. So what we're saying here in E511 is that we're going to not withstand the statute that would have decreased the amount of assistance grants and maintain the level of assistance to tech ed centers from the Ed Fund. So that's why that section is there. AOE can speak to you about that.
Yeah.
But it did actually cause a fair amount of consternation within tech centers. Some of you may have received emails on that.
Yeah.
And then in E514, it's just as we did with BSERS and BMERS earlier, it just kind of breaks down what is dedicated to paying back the unfunded liability and what's dedicated to the normal cost.
So we are taking 199 million out of the general fund
We are.
for this, plus 41.4 million.
Yeah.
In the general fund. So we've got $241 million essentially that we are spending on our unfunded. Okay.
What I like to point out is that's 10% of the general fund.
Of the general fund, yes.
10% of the general fund, which
Right.
is
And
a very large amount considering. But I mean, it's some mistakes you keep paying for and paying for. So
yes, and this is one we're going to learn. And I saw Rep. Harrison and then Rep. Ricky.
So real quickly, if you put state employees and the teachers' retirement contributions out of the general fund, how much are we talking about as a percentage of the general fund? Is it 20% or is it 15? I mean,
wow. The state employees component is a little tricky because some of that is paid with federal funds and special funds.
Sure.
But I would say another, gosh, Hardy, looking at you too. Because
and when you said 10% just for the teachers, it's a huge number.
it's a big number. I can, you know what, Representative Harrison, I can come up with a precise number and send it to you. I don't want to
I
guess.
think we'd probably like to know if the appropriations committee what that is.
We have that. We have that number.
Okay.
And
like a
I'll
new
come up with you. But
Okay.
it probably isn't 20%, but it's probably more than 15%. I would say that.
Okay, thank you.
So you're welcome.
Great.
So, and with E514 and E515.
Oh, question with Mike, from Mike too, before we go on to. Okay.
Maybe Adam can answer this question, or maybe it's for Mike Pichak, but if we did not put that amount of money backfill the pension, how would that look to the bond rating agencies?
That would be not favored by them, I'll put that
It would be
way.
a really bad thing.
It would be a really bad thing.
Yeah.
They would frown on that. I would say that.
That's the technical term. It would be a really bad thing.
Yes.
Just for the record.
Yes, it's a good reminder and a good reminder of why we paid it in the beginning. Here we are.
I would only say, the only point is, it's a huge percentage and not at all suggesting we don't contribute it, but it's a little bit like our discretionary spending is, well, smaller, than the whole, that's all.
And I think I would just add on the topic, in addition, there's the pension plus payment. All right, 15 million general fund. This is just the regular base funding.
15 million sounds like a
Times
lot
two.
less after,
Yeah.
299
But
million.
isn't that 15 million times two?
Well, it's 15 million for
Yeah.
the teacher's retirement and 15 million
Yeah, times
for
two.
the state. So yes,
Yeah.
yes, if you're talking about all retirement systems combined.
Hmm.
So I'm just skimming ahead because we don't need to get you back if we don't have to, but I really do want to finish up. But it looks like the UVM and Vermont State Colleges are all the usual things that we do.
Yeah, they are. There's only two remaining sections that are, I think, notable. Section E 715 on page 45 essentially is repealing a sunset of a property transfer tax surcharge for the Clean Water Fund. So it's striking some effective dates and proposing to keep that surcharge for the Clean Water Fund in place. And section E 900 is also notable because it is, this is the language that essentially corresponds to the quote unquote JITOC transfer.
Right, so this
It's really an appropriation of
removal.
20.25 million. Yeah, 20.25 million of transportation fund appropriated to DPS. So you can see they're striking the language from statute that permits transportation funds to be appropriated for DPS. And then there's also language in sub B of this statute being repealed that comports with that $2.1 million allocation for vehicles that I pointed out earlier. So that's what's
Okay.
taking place here. And that brings us to the end, other than section F100, the effective date section, which I don't think I need to go into great detail on, although I did notice that I think we may have made some versioning errors with some of the second numbers we're referring to here, at least on my copy, and I'll follow up with the Joint Fiscal Office if we need to make any edits to the section number references.
Thank you both very much. We got through the whole language. Appreciate it. We have a lot to digest and we'll let you know if we have questions for you all. Otherwise, we're obviously meeting with all of the other agencies and things. And Commissioner, I would like to thank you for helping to get the agency ag here this morning.
How did that
and for
go?
you coming in this afternoon, the timing, that was just the right amount of stuff from my perspective. And it was nice to keep being able to move ahead because we had such limited time to get this budget out. So thank you.
Yeah. He probably could have done that in his sleep. He's been here 8 years. I mean, he's one of the secretaries that actually could do his whole budget himself.
Yes.
I mean, he's
Well, I
just
know
good.
he-
So.
Including the cute, animal pictures. So, all right, thank you, guys. We will see you again.
right.
Thank you all.
Good luck, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be done after the floor today. There's a reception in the cafeteria from 4 to 6, put on by the National Guard, so you know. Tomorrow morning, we are going to check in here at 9, because if there are any amendments, I've heard of a couple, and then I've heard they're not happening, so, but we're leaving 9 to 9:30 to review any amendments. So please be in the committee by 9, and it may be that we just say we don't have any amendments. But that's our next plan. And then when we're off the floor, I promised you we'd be done, and